a professional portrait painter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Today I just want to let you know a little bit about some of the products that I use as far as the materials that I use when I'm painting. I get a lot of questions from artists all the time really about what paints do you use and what do you use, what materials do you use when you're actually painting portraits. And so today I just wanted to take a few minutes and show you some of the products that I use that might be of help to you as well. These are things that I use on a daily basis and things that I've found to be extremely helpful in my own business, and maybe some things that you would want to try out as well. First of all, I'll start out with basically this palette that I have. This is actually not something that I bought at a store. This is actually something that I made just for the fact that I like to work on a glass palette. And the reason I like to work on a glass palette is because it's easily, you can clean it up very easily with a paint scraper, which I have as well. So when I put paint down and I'm mixing paint, if I want to just clear out an area, I'll just go in and scrape off the paint and then wipe it off with a paper towel, and it works very well. And the reason I have a white palette is because a lot of times, most of the time, I'm working on a white canvas. And because I'm working on a white canvas, I like to have a white palette as well to more accurately judge those colors at the beginning. If I was to work on a toned canvas, meaning that you take a single color like raw umber or burnt sienna or something, more of a natural brownish color, and tone the canvas, put a color and cover the entire canvas to get rid of the white of the canvas, then I would use a palette that would match that, like more of a wooden colored palette, more of a brownish color underneath the glass as well. There are also some artists that prefer to tone their canvas with more of a gray color, and if that was the case, if I was doing that, then I would switch and have maybe a gray color underneath the palette here as well. But it just seems to help. There's no right or wrong way about doing it, but this is just the way that I prefer and the way that I've come accustomed to working. So basically, this whole metal kit here is actually an art kit that my daughter had. And she was finished with it, and I was getting ready to throw it out, and I looked at the case and thought, wow, that's kind of a nice case. It's a metal case. It's a shame just to get rid of it. And so what I did was I took a piece of foam board and stuck that underneath, actually two pieces of foam board, I think, and stuck it, adhered that to the box itself, and then took a piece of glass that I had cut. I got cut at a home improvement store, and stuck that in here as well, and just put some adhesive caulk around it, and it stays just fine. And I did that on both sides. That way, whenever I go to teach or to speak somewhere or to demonstrate, I can just take the whole case with me and open it up, and I'm ready to go. And so that's the palette. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the materials that I use here as far as palette knives. Really, there's a variety of palette knives that I have here, but really the three probably that I use most are going to be these three. This is a large palette knife that I use for mixing, and the reason I like this one so much is because it is so large, you can mix a large amount of paint. If you try mixing paint with a little one like this, you can do the same thing. You can mix paint, but you're only mixing a very small pile. It takes a lot longer to do, and plus if you have a large area in your painting that you want a particular color mixed, by mixing a large pile of it, you don't have to go back and try to match that color again or try to remix it again. And that's why I like using the large palette knife. Another thing I like about this palette knife is the shape. It's a trowel shape, meaning that it doesn't go straight out, but it goes down, and that it really helps when you're mixing paint, because you can turn it over. I'll just mix some paint here since I'm here. You can take it. I can mix it like this. I can turn it over, as opposed to just being a straight out trowel or straight out palette knife, which I've used before as well. But I find that the ones that, especially with oil paint, the ones that don't have the trowel shape on them, they tend to you end up with more paint that kind of moves its way up, and that you try to get that paint off, and it's more difficult to get off of the palette knife. So that's why I like the trowel shaped palette knife, but that's one that I use quite a bit. This other palette knife I use not really for mixing, but more for painting. Like in backgrounds, I can take I can take part of that, part of the paint and put it on one side of the palette knife, and then I can take it and put it on my painting and kind of pull it across, and it creates some nice, interesting effects as well, especially in backgrounds. This one does the same thing as I use it the same way, like in backgrounds, and that I would this little one, but this one gives you more of an accidental look because it's shaped. It looks like a dentist's tool to me, but it's more of an oval shape. And when you use this one, you can either pull it the same way, or you can take it the opposite way, and you get a different effect. And when you do that on canvas, it gives you more of an accidental look that lends itself better, I think, for foliage. It doesn't look like it's been thought out so much. It looks more like you would see it in nature. And those are the three basic palette knives that I use. I'll use these others as well, but not quite as much. But I use them for painting, for mixing. Basically, these three would be for painting. This one might be for mixing if it wasn't, if I didn't have a large amount of a certain color that I needed. Another thing that I use is, this is just a simple caliper. I get asked a lot of times what this thing is, and it's actually just an X-Acto caliper that I got out of an old kit that I had in the attic. I think they do still sell them, but what I use them for is to measure distances on my canvas. So if I wanted to measure a distance, from the top of these bristles down to the bottom of this ferrule here, I could do that, and then now I have a set measurement that I can measure other things on. It just makes it easier than having to go in with a brush and kind of eyeing it like this and moving your thumb up and down, which is which you can do quite a bit very easily. But when I'm working, I just find that the caliper seems to work much easier for me. And it's a simple tool, but it works well. Another thing that I use is Liquin from Winsor & Newton. I don't use this a whole lot. I use this more towards the end of a portrait if I need to add more color into maybe a shadow area. I'll put some Liquin down on the canvas, and then I'll add in some of the paint that I need, and then sort of glaze it on top of the portrait after it's dry, glaze it on top, and then a lot of times I'm actually either taking a dry brush and wiping it right off, or else I'm taking a paper towel and kind of wiping it off. And what you're left with is sort of a patina of color, just a subtle hint of color, just enough to give me the look that I'm after in a portrait, because a lot of times portraits are very subtle. There's a lot of subtle value transitions and a lot of subtle color transitions as well, and the Liquin comes in handy sometimes near the end of a portrait. I also have a couple of things here, a couple of containers that I use for mixing or having paint thinner in for brushes. The reason I have two different containers is because the first container takes the majority of the paint. If I just use one container, it can get pretty muddy pretty fast, very fast actually. Even though I may take the paper towel and I'll wipe off some paint, after I'm finished painting, I'll wipe off the paint, and then I'll dip my brush into this first container of paint thinner, and I'll smash it against the bottom of the container, move it around just to get the majority of the paint off. Then after I do that, I'll take my brush, wipe it off again, and then I'll stick it in the second container. And what the second container does is it cleans it even better. So that way the second container doesn't get as dirty as quickly as the first container does. And it just seems to help me get my brushes cleaner a lot better, and I'm able to paint a lot longer without having to go back and switch out the paint thinner. Because if the paint thinner gets too muddy too fast, eventually your brushes aren't getting clean, and then that's eventually going to end up on your canvas. And so you want to keep things as clean as you can. You can see here I've got a variety of brushes. Basically, brushes are a very personal thing when it comes to artists, but the type of brushes really that I like to use are I like to use a variety of bristle brushes, which are pretty sturdy brushes that I can use to block in a painting. I can use the bristles in a background, areas where I want to cover ground very quickly. Then I also have a bunch of synthetic brushes as well. You can see a bunch of these brushes. These are put out by Silverbrush, and they're called Ruby Satins. And I really have come to love these brushes. They're sharp, they're crisp, they have a nice edge to them. They work great, but even over time, these brushes can take a lot of abuse, and I really do use and abuse my brushes quite a bit. And they end up looking like this, which is more like a cotton ball on the end. And a lot of people would throw a brush like this away, but I actually use these brushes quite a bit. I've got them in all different sizes. You can see what they look like. They look terrible at the when you're just looking at them. But as far as blending and as far as doing subtle transitions and softening edges, they work great, and I use them all the time. I also have I'll take this. I have a handheld mirror. Basically, what I do is I'll take the handheld mirror and I'll hold it up and I'll look at the image in the mirror as I'm looking at the painting that I'm working on. I'll look at a reverse image, and what it does is it gives you not only the reverse image, but it gives you it shows you right away imperfections in your drawing, and it gives you a fresh eye. Basically, it's almost like looking at a new painting, and that's why I use the handheld mirror. I use that on a daily basis, and that's one of the most important tools that I have when I'm working. What else do I have here? Paper towels are extremely important. Some people use rags, or some people they have their own preference as far as paper towels go, but I love Viva paper towels. These are very strong paper towels. They almost feel like cloth, and they're highly absorbent. I think they're fantastic, and a lot of times I don't use the entire sheet of Viva paper towels. I'll usually just take it and tear them in sections, usually 3 or 4 strips, and then use the strips like this, because they last for so long. Now there are some Viva paper towels that they do sell that are automatically perforated into smaller strips, and those work well too, but I just find that it's just as easy to tear them yourself. And then what else do I have? I've got retouch varnish by Winsor & Newton, which I use every day before working on a portrait or any painting that I've worked on the day before. This is extremely helpful because the Winsor & Newton varnish, or the retouch varnish, a lot of times what happens in oil painting especially is the darker colors, they tend to become dull very quickly, and it's what artists often refer to as sinking in. So if a color sinks into the canvas, that just simply means that it looks more dull. It doesn't look as vibrant as it did when you first painted it. And so by spraying the retouch varnish onto the canvas, what it does is it brings that gloss and that the actual value, the true value that you had when you first painted, when you first worked on the painting, brings it up to full value again. So that way, as you continue to work on the painting, you can accurately judge value relationships. Which is extremely important, because if I didn't spray the retouch varnish on there, one of the colors that I painted yesterday, it may look a value lighter today on the canvas. And because it looks a value lighter, I'm going to then start judging the rest of my values that I'm working on today based on that value, only to find out later on that it really wasn't the correct value once I spray some varnish over top. So that's very important, and that's the reason I use the retouch varnish. With the lighter colors, it's not as big of a deal, but with the darker colors, it's especially important to be able to spray some retouch varnish on it. And the retouch varnish is actually the thinnest of the varnishes, so it's not like a final varnish. So you can go ahead and paint over top of it with no problem, and I use that every day as well. And as far as the paints go, I have here Winsor & Newton, the professional grade paint. I have a variety of colors here that I use. There's about 15 colors, I believe, here. And what they are, you don't need all of these colors, of course, on your palette. A lot of these are convenience colors for me, meaning that I'll use them in place of having to remix them every single time I paint. And I just like to have the colors already out there, and I'm just ready to go and start mixing flesh tones or working on a portrait or whatever the subject may be. And so the Winsor & Newton colors are fantastic. I've used them for probably 20 years now, and they're excellent. Some of the I'll just go ahead and name off the colors. As I mentioned before, these are all Winsor & Newton professional grade colors. There's actually one color on here that is not the professional grade, and that's the Winton brand, and that's the titanium white. And the reason I use the titanium white, the Winton brand, is because it contains the same amount of pigment as the professional grade, so there's really no difference in there. And it's a little bit cheaper, a little bit less expensive, and I can buy more of it because I go through a lot of white. And so I'll start out with that one. That is titanium white. Then I have, here comes the professional grade colors here. I have raw sienna, gold ochre, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium scarlet, cadmium red deep. This is a permanent alizarin crimson. They have a regular alizarin crimson as well, but the permanent, for whatever reason, I think will last longer, and that's why they've come out with the permanent alizarin crimson. And so I use permanent alizarin crimson. This color here, this sort of a fluorescent green color, is cadmium green pale. Then I have a sap green. This is Prussian green. This is Viridian. This is called a manganese blue hue, which is a nice color. It's a warmer blue, very nice. This is French ultramarine blue. So those are all the colors that I use. You'll notice that I don't have black on my palette. And the reason is I've just gotten so used to not using black. When it comes to color, I'm more of the mindset of the Impressionists and don't use black. There are different ways to mix some of these colors together to give you the illusion of black. Say, for instance, like a Prussian green and a permanent alizarin crimson. You can mix those two together, and depending on what's on your canvas, when you put that down, it'll appear to be black, even though it's not black. But the reason I don't use black is because I can use all of these other colors to get some colors that mimic black, but they're more rich and more vibrant. And that's one of the reasons I don't use black. But also black, when a lot of times artists will use black to try to darken a color. They think just by adding black, we'll go ahead and darken that color, but it will darken the color, but actually it will change the color as well, because black not only darkens a color, but it changes the color altogether. If you've never tried out any of these products, I would just give them a try and see if they work for you. Sometimes they'll work for you, sometimes they won't. But these are products that I've used for many years that I've found over and over again, time and time again, have consistently produced great results. And really that's what I'm after, are great results, as you are too, I'm sure, when you're working on your artwork. And if you want great results, then use some great products, and in each one of these I would highly recommend